My fellow Americans, the right to vote has not always been available to all citizens of the United States. In fact, the right to vote was a hard-fought struggle over the period of a century by suffragists, those brave men and women who came before me to pave the way. When this country was founded, only white male property owners were given the right to vote. Within 50 years, some progress had been made to eliminate the restrictions on voting, but by the time of the Civil War, all white male citizens could vote. However, this was not the case for women or for minorities. 60 years ago, I would not have been able to vote. The suffragist movement began in the mid-1800s. Women such as Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Lucretia Mott braved criticism for their efforts. I would like to have had the chance to meet them and to thank them, for I owe them so much. The suffragists were fighting for the right to vote, which is what suffrage means. It is also sometimes referred to as the term franchise. After the Civil War, blacks were still not as free as their white counterparts. Even though President Ulysses S. Grant passed the 15th Amendment, in which guaranteed all male citizens, regardless of race or color, the right to vote, little changed for my ancestors or for women. I still would not have been able to vote. Unfortunately, the 15th Amendment was unsuccessful in guaranteeing the right to vote to all male citizens, particularly the newly freed black slaves. Essentially, the 15th Amendment was written in a manner which made it non-self-executing, meaning it was worthless. Southern states implemented the Jim Crow laws, which were aimed at impeding or denying altogether the right to vote through certain measures. My grandparents and my parents fought against this discrimination of the separate but equal practices. Politicians in southern states came up with several different ways to negate the 15th Amendment. One way in which the 15th Amendment was ineffective was the use of gerrymandering. Politicians could break up the political influence or power of a specific group or minority by dividing up the congressional districts. When this happened, those of my ancestors who could vote had very little influence in the polls. Another way in which the 15th Amendment was ineffective was the creation of poll taxes. Black voters who showed up to vote were assessed a fee to be able to vote. Many of my black constituents could not vote because they were already poor and repressed growing up in the South and simply could not afford to vote. This silenced our voices in the elections. One of the most effective means of keeping blacks from voting was by implementing literacy tests. You had to be able to pass a literacy test before you were allowed to vote, and considering most blacks after the Civil War were illiterate, because it was illegal to teach slaves how to read and write. Not only that, because my people were so poorly educated, the literacy tests were quite difficult, and those who could read had difficulty passing the tests. Finally, in 1920, women were finally given the right to vote through the passage of the 19th Amendment, which took 42 years to ratify and pass into law, but still I could not vote. It would not be until 1965 that black citizens would finally be given the right to vote, after the Jim Crow laws had been determined to be illegal under the Voting Rights Act of 1965. The Voting Rights Act abolished the poll taxes, literacy tests, and other barriers aimed at preventing minorities from voting. Additionally, it introduced the concept of preclearance, which meant that the states must pre-clear any legislation pertaining to voting to the federal courts before they can implement in their states. The suffragist movement was a grassroots effort at promoting change. It was not until the federal government began taking more control over the right to vote that we finally see change. This was considered a states' rights issue, and after the Union victory in the Civil War, and subsequently the federal government flexing its supremacy over the states, we finally began to see the tides of change slowly impacting not only voting rights but basic civil rights. Over the last century, there have been many changes to the American political system, and there have been many firsts of which I am proud of. My name is Michelle Obama, and this is my history. Without the suffragist movement, I would not have been able to stand on the steps of the Capitol with President Lincoln's Bible in hand while my husband, the first black president, was sworn in. I appreciate you allowing me the opportunity to speak to you today. I sincerely hope that this story of how women and blacks finally received the right to vote inspires you to go out and vote. Just remember, yes, we can. Thank you.